The air in the apartment is heavy, thick with the kind of silence that rings in your ears and makes your chest tight. Man, living with a foreigner must be exhausting, Minjun laughs, leaning back against the worn fabric of the sofa. He doesn't even look at her, taking a long, lazy sip of his beer. Do you guys even talk, or do you just point at things and hope for the best? T. Min's jaw tightens instantly. He shifts forward, his broad shoulders tensing, his voice low and fiercely protective. He speaks entirely in rapid Korean. Hey, doesn't blink. She reaches out, her slender fingers catching the cold condensation on her water glass. She pushes it across the wooden table. The glass scrapes loudly through the quiet room, a harsh sound that demands immediate attention. She looks dead at Minjun, her expression completely calm, betraying absolutely no emotion. When she parts her lips, the words that come out are flawless, perfectly enunciated Seoul dialect Korean. Actually, we communicate just fine, but I'd appreciate it if you didn't talk about me like I'm a stray dog you picked up off the street. Nobody breathes. The cheap wall clock ticking in the kitchen suddenly sounds like a gunshot. Minjun's mouth literally falls open, the beer bottle slipping slightly in his grip. Slowly, with agonizing precision, Ember shifts her gaze to T. Min. He is completely frozen. The shock, the embarrassment, and a quiet, devastating realization flood his dark eyes all at once. Stares at her as if looking at a ghost. You. His voice drops to a hollow, broken whisper. You understood us, this whole time. To understand how a single sentence could shatter an entire reality, we have to rewind the tape to a rainy Tuesday, exactly 3 months earlier. The rain in Seoul doesn't just fall, it bites. It is a relentless, unforgiving downpour. Ember stands in the narrow, dimly lit hallway of a brick apartment building, wrestling 2 massive suitcases that hold her entire life. She is 27, running on 3 hours of sleep, and functioning solely on the sheer relief of finally finding a lease she can afford. The landlord, Mrs. Han, a woman with a warm, crinkling smile and the chaotic energy of a protective aunt, pushes the apartment door open. Standing in the middle of the small, meticulously kept living room is Kang T. Min. He is 29, wearing an oversized gray hoodie, his dark hair falling messy and damp into his eyes. He freezes mid-step, looking from Mrs. Han to Ember with a sudden flash of mild, unspoken panic. He clears his throat, bows awkwardly, and forces a strained, visibly tight smile. Hello, he says. His English is slow, heavily weighed down by hesitation and a thick accent. Nice. Meet. You. Ember smiles warmly, bowing in return. She doesn't say a word about her fluency. She just nods, letting the silence settle between them. For years, she has watched people change the moment they realize she speaks their language perfectly. They become performative. They test her. They overcompensate or they completely shut down. She is exhausted from being an exhibit. She just wants to exist in peace. She wants to see who people are when they think nobody is listening. This is real Seoul Stories. This story is just starting. Please like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching us from. Now let's continue. Later that night, the apartment is dead quiet. The storm still rages outside, raindrops pelting the single bedroom window. Ember is unpacking her clothes, carefully placing folded sweaters into a small dresser when she hears the low, rumbling murmur of T. Min's voice through the thin drywall. He is on the phone. I hope this won't be awkward, he groans in rapid, comfortable Korean. He sounds completely different from the stiff, formal man she met just hours ago. His voice is deeper, relaxed, yet threaded with anxiety. I've never lived with a foreigner before. My English is terrible. What if there's an emergency and I can't explain it? A pause. Through the wall, she hears him sigh heavily, the sound of his footsteps packing the wooden floorboards. She seems nice, though, he murmurs softly. I just don't want to make her uncomfortable. He isn't mocking her. He isn't arrogant. He isn't annoyed by her presence. He is just genuinely, entirely nervous. Sitting on the edge of her unmade bed, Ember smiles into the dark room. Right then, she makes the decision. She isn't going to tell him. Not yet. The slow burn begins in the quiet, unremarkable spaces between them. It isn't built on dramatic declarations or cinematic gestures. It is built on the silent observation of a shared routine. 2 weeks into their arrangement, the unspoken dynamic takes shape. Ember is running late. She attempts to make breakfast before an early morning seminar, moving frantically around the small kitchen. She entirely burns her toast, the smoke alarm letting out a brief, piercing chirp. Panicking, she scrapes the charred remains into the trash, violently scrubs the ruined frying pan, and rushes out the door with wet hair. She assumes he didn't notice. She assumes it is just another forgotten morning. But the next day, sitting precisely on the center of the stove, is a brand new high-quality non-stick pan. It still has the store tag wrapped around the handle. T. Min is nowhere to be found. He never mentions the smoke alarm. He never brings up the ruined pan. She never thanks him. The new pan simply becomes a permanent fixture in their shared life. Days later, the heavy summer monsoon rains return with a vengeance. Ember is perpetually forgetting her umbrella, a habit she curses under her breath as she stands in the living room, staring out the window at the gray sheet of water. She calculates how fast she can sprint the 4 blocks to the subway station without ruining her notes. She turns to leave, pulling her jacket tight around her shoulders. As she opens the front door, she stops. Leaning perfectly against the doorframe, directly in her line of sight, is a sleek, black umbrella. Ember turns her head. T. Min is in the kitchen. His back is rigidly turned to her, his shoulders tense. He is aggressively focused on pouring a cup of coffee, staring intensely at the dark liquid so he doesn't have to acknowledge what he just did. "Thank you," she calls out softly in English, her voice barely carrying over the sound of the rain. T. Min flinches slightly. He waves a hand in the air without turning around, a dismissive, awkward gesture. "Ah, yes. Okay," he mutters thickly. He is observant. He watches her when he thinks she isn't looking. He notices the small things, the micro-habits she doesn't even realize she has. And because she understands every muttered word under his breath, she notices him too. She sits on the sofa reading a textbook, perfectly still, while she hears him in the hallway cursing out his project manager in colorful, highly inventive Korean. "If that man asks me to revise the code one more time, I am throwing his keyboard into the Han River," he mutters viciously, kicking his shoes off. Ember bites the inside of her cheek to stop the laugh from escaping, carefully turning a page in her book. She listens to him sing terribly, completely off-key pop ballads while taking a shower. He belts out the high notes with tragic, unearned confidence. She smiles into her pillow at night, listening to every missed note echo through the plumbing. She watches him struggle late one Friday night at the small dining table. He has his head in his hands, pulling at his hair as he tries to translate a software presentation from Korean into English. He groans, muttering about grammar rules that make absolutely no sense. While he steps into the bathroom to wash his face, Ember slides out of her room. She approaches the table, quickly scanning his open notebook. She quietly rewrites the awkward phrasing on his notes, fixing the disjointed syntax. Before she retreats to her room, she leaves a small yellow sticky note right on top of his laptop keyboard. It simply says, "Google Translate is getting better." Asterisk. When she hears his footsteps return, she holds her breath behind her closed door. She hears the rustle of paper, a long pause, and then a soft, unmistakable chuckle. The safety between them begins to deepen. It wraps around them like a heavy, invisible blanket. They are 2 solitary people existing in a shared space, communicating in broken English, small favors and unspoken gestures. They are dancing around a massive secret, but the rhythm is entirely intoxicating. Summer slowly bleeds into autumn, the oppressive humidity of Seoul breaking into crisp, biting evenings. As the temperature drops outside, the atmosphere inside the small apartment shifts. It transforms from a mere shared living space into a quiet, heavily guarded sanctuary. The invisible boundary lines they drew during their first week begin to blur. It happens late one Tuesday night in November. A sudden, violent windstorm rolls over the city, rattling the window panes. Without warning, the power grid flickers, emits a low hum, and dies completely. The apartment is plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. Ember steps out of her bedroom, using the weak flashlight on her phone to navigate the hallway. Before she reaches the kitchen, T. Min's door opens. He emerges holding a single, thick white candle set on a small ceramic saucer. He places it on the low coffee table between the 2 sofas. The flat, sterile fluorescent light of the apartment is instantly replaced by deep, flickering shadows and a warm, golden glow. The physical space between them suddenly feels dangerous, intimate, and impossibly small. They sit on the floor on opposite sides of the coffee table. The silence stretches. but it isn't the awkward, hesitant silence of strangers anymore. It is the heavy, exhausted silence of two people who have nowhere else to be. Min leans forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his face illuminated by the flame. He stares blankly at the melting wax. "So tired," he whispers. He says it entirely in Korean, his voice cracks. It is stripped of all its usual polite distance, devoid of the careful, curated persona he presents to the world. It is a raw, jagged sound of pure exhaustion. Ember's breath hitches in the dark. He doesn't realize she is awake. He doesn't realize she understands every single syllable. She sits perfectly still on the rug, her heart hammering against her ribs, feeling the immense weight of his vulnerability pressing down on her. "Work?" she asks softly in English, pretending she only caught the melancholic tone of his voice and not the actual words. Min looks up. The candlelight catches the faint dark circles under his eyes. He stares at her for a long moment, as if deciding how much armor to take off. Slowly he nods. "Yes," he says, his English heavily accented and quiet. "Very hard today." Ember doesn't offer empty platitudes. She doesn't tell him it will get better. Instead, she stands up. She navigates the dark kitchen entirely by memory, pulling out a container of leftover Nigerian stew she had made the day before. She sets up a small, portable butane stove on the counter, the blue flame hissing to life in the dark. 10 minutes later, she walks back to the living room holding 2 ceramic bowls. She hands him one along with a silver spoon. Min looks down at the rich, dark red broth. He takes a cautious spoonful. Ember watches him carefully. The moment the spice hits his tongue, his eyes widen to the size of saucers. He freezes. A faint sheen of sweat immediately breaks out on his forehead. He swallows hard, coughing violently, his face turning a brilliant, alarming shade of red as he scrambles blindly for his glass of water. "Spicy?" Ember asks, trying and entirely failing to bite back a smile. "No." Min lies weakly, his voice hoarse, literal tears welling in his dark eyes. He takes another masochistic bite, refusing to put the spoon down. "Very good, strong." It is the first time Ember genuinely laughs around him. It is a bright, clear, uninhibited sound that cuts right through the gloom of the blackout. Min stops drinking his water. He just stops and looks at her. The rigid defensive tension in his shoulders completely melts away. A slow, genuine smile spreads across his flushed face. They spend the next 3 hours sitting on the floor by candlelight. They speak entirely in English, stumbling over complicated words, using their hands to explain concepts, laughing when the translations fail them. Ironically, the deepest, most honest conversation they have ever had happens in the one language that isn't native to either of them. He tells her about his mother. He explains that she passed away 5 years ago, leaving him to navigate the city alone. He struggles deeply to find the right English words for grief, pausing often, his brow furrowed in frustration. In those quiet, agonizing moments, he mutters the exact Korean translations to himself under his breath, trying to build a bridge to her. Ember listens to both. She understands the raw, poetic devastation of his grief in Korean, and she graciously accepts the simplified, broken English version he ultimately hands her. She holds both versions of him simultaneously. By the time the lights finally flicker back on at 4 in the morning, the air between them has irrevocably shifted. They are no longer just roommates sharing an address. The safety has evolved into something entirely different, something heavy. The emotional restraint begins to fray. Min starts waiting for her. If he finishes coding early at his firm, he doesn't go straight home. Instead, he lingers at a small, overpriced coffee shop 2 blocks from her university campus. He times it perfectly so that when she walks out of her final seminar, they just happen to bump into each other on the pavement. "Ah, Ember," he says smoothly, feigning surprise, holding a half-empty paper cup. "Going home, just finished," she smiles, perfectly aware of the ruse. When they board the evening subway together, the train is always packed shoulder to shoulder with tired commuters. Min doesn't stand by the doors. He navigates through the crush of bodies, finding a single empty seat. Instead of taking it, he stands directly in front of it. He subtly shifts his broad shoulders, planting his feet firmly, using his own body as a physical shield against the rushing crowd until Ember catches up and slips into the seat safely. He stands over her, his hand gripping the overhead rail. The train lurches forward. His knee knocks gently against hers. Neither of them pulls away. His coworkers start to notice the shift. A week later, his firm's junior designer, Jae-yoon, drops by the apartment to deliver a stack of misplaced physical server logs. While Ember is in the kitchen making tea, Jae-yoon leans against the kitchen island, her sharp eyes darting between the two of them. "You like her," Jae-yoon teases in rapid, hushed Korean, smirking at T-min. "Don't even try to lie to me, you idiot. You look at her like she hung the moon." T-min's face flushes a dark, furious crimson. "Shut up," he hisses back in Korean, glancing frantically toward the kitchen to make sure Ember is out of earshot. "She's my roommate. It's not like that. Keep your voice down." "You bought a $40 premium umbrella because she looked sad at the rain," Jae-yoon counters effortlessly, crossing her arms. "You don't even buy me coffee." Standing at the stove, Ember grips the edge of the granite counter so hard her knuckles turn completely white. She stares blindly at the boiling water. She bites the inside of her cheek until she tastes copper, desperate to stop the heat rising in her own chest. She hears everything. She knows exactly how he feels, but the rush of warmth is violently chased by a cold, sinking guilt. Every time he looks at her with that soft, unguarded expression, it physically hurts, because she is hiding something massive. She has become a vault for his secrets, holding onto his private thoughts, his muttered insecurities, his quiet confessions in the dark. The audience knows it. Ember knows it. The longer she waits to tell him the truth, the worse the inevitable fallout is going to be. The bomb is ticking, and she is the only one who can hear it. The breaking point does not arrive with a dramatic warning. It arrives on a completely ordinary Friday night in early December, disguised as a casual dinner party. T-min had asked her nervously that morning, standing by the coffee maker, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He explained in his careful, halting English that a few old university friends were in the neighborhood. They wanted to bring fried chicken and soju to the apartment. He explicitly told her she didn't have to stay, offering her a polite out. "I don't mind," Ember had smiled, leaning against the counter. "I'd love to meet them." Relief that washed over his face was immediate. He had nodded quickly, a soft, genuine smile breaking through his usual reserved demeanor. By 8 o'clock, the small apartment is packed. The air is thick with the smell of garlic, fried batter, and the sharp tang of alcohol. There are 3 of them, Jae-yoon, who gives Ember a warm, knowing wink, a quiet guy named Do-yeon, and Min-jun, a loud, charismatic engineer who immediately takes up the majority of the sofa. At first, they try. They really do. For the first 20 minutes, the conversation is a chaotic, strained mix of broken English and overly exaggerated hand gestures. Ember plays her part perfectly, smiling politely, laughing at the physical comedy, and offering up simple, easily digestible sentences. But alcohol is a powerful solvent for good intentions. As the green soju bottles pile up on the coffee table, the English slowly evaporates. It is replaced by rapid, comfortable, slurred Korean. Ember sits quietly in the armchair adjacent to the sofa, a half-empty glass of water in her hand. She adopts the universal posture of the polite foreigner, a pleasant, slightly vacant smile, her eyes occasionally dropping to her phone as if she is politely entertaining herself while letting them catch up. She is not entertaining herself. She is listening to absolutely everything. "So," Min-jun says, pouring another shot for T-min. He leans forward, dropping his voice just a fraction, though there is no real need. "Are you going to make a move, or are you just going to continue staring at her like a tragic Victorian ghost?" T-min chokes on his drink. He thumps his chest, his face turning a brilliant shade of crimson. "Shut your mouth," T-min hisses in Korean, his eyes darting frantically toward Ember. Ember doesn't look up from her phone screen. She very deliberately scrolls down a blank webpage, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. "Serious," Min-jun laughs, clearly enjoying the panic. He gestures loosely toward Ember with his shot glass. "She's gorgeous, and you've been single since the Cretaceous period. Just ask her out." "You are out of your mind," T-min mutters, though he doesn't deny the attraction. He looks at Ember again. His voice softens, entirely unguarded. "She wouldn't want this. She's focused on her studies. Besides, the language barrier. I can't even tell her about my day properly. How could I ask her to stay?" The vulnerability in his voice makes Ember's chest physically ache. She wants to look up. She wants to answer him. She wants to tell him that she hears him, that she understands every single word, that she has already stayed. But she stays frozen. Minjun rolls his eyes, taking the shot. The liquor clearly makes him bolder, stripping away whatever filter he had left. Man, living with a foreigner must be exhausting, Minjun laughs, leaning back against the worn fabric of the sofa. He doesn't even look at Ember now, taking a long, lazy sip of his beer. Do you guys even talk, or do you just point at things and hope for the best? T Min's jaw tightens instantly. He shifts forward, his broad shoulders tensing, his voice low and fiercely protective. Hey, doesn't blink. She has spent her entire life shrinking to make other people comfortable. She has hidden her intelligence, her fluency, and her awareness just to keep the peace. But sitting here, listening to this man dismiss her humanity while the man she is falling in love with tries to shield her, the restraint finally snaps. She reaches out, her slender fingers catching the cold condensation on her water glass. She pushes it across the wooden table. The glass scrapes loudly through the quiet room, a harsh sound that cuts through the hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic. She looks dead at Minjun, her expression completely calm. When she parts her lips, the words that come out are flawless, perfectly enunciated Seoul dialect Korean. Actually, we communicate just fine. But I'd appreciate it if you didn't talk about me like I'm a stray dog you picked up off the street. Nobody breathes. The cheap wall clock ticking in the kitchen suddenly sounds like a gunshot. Minjun's mouth literally falls open, the beer bottle slipping slightly in his grip. Jae-yoon covers her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with absolute terror. Slowly, with agonizing precision, Ember shifts her gaze to T Min. He is completely frozen. The shock, the embarrassment, and a quiet, devastating realization flood his dark eyes all at once. He stares at her as if the woman he has been living with for 3 months has suddenly been replaced by a stranger. His voice drops to a hollow, broken whisper. You understood us. This whole time. Ember holds his gaze, her own eyes burning. She gives a single, slow nod. It takes less than 3 minutes for the apartment to empty. Minjun stammers out a pathetic apology, bowing so deeply he nearly hits the coffee table before scrambling for his coat. Jae-yoon simply touches T Min's shoulder in silent sympathy before rushing out the door. The front door clicks shut. The silence that follows is suffocating, heavy with the wreckage of a shattered reality. T Min stands by the window, his back to her, staring out into the dark, rain-slicked street. He isn't yelling. He isn't throwing things. The anger would be so much easier to handle. Anger is hot and burns out. What he is radiating is cold. It is a deep, profound hurt. It's not that you speak Korean, Ember. His voice is tight, strained, the words dropping like heavy stones into the quiet room. It's that I spent the last 3 months thinking out loud around you, and you just sat there, watching me. Ember stands up, her chest tight, the guilt finally crushing the air out of her lungs. T Min, every time I practiced my English before talking to you, he interrupts, turning to face her. His eyes are red-rimmed, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle ticks in his cheek. Every time I complained about my day, every time I talked to myself about you, you heard all of it. Just wanted someone to treat me normally, she says, her voice breaking, the tears finally spilling over. Without the novelty, without the judgment, before they knew what I could do. T Min stares at her. The physical distance between them is only 10 feet, but it feels like a sprawling, impassable canyon. So who did I actually get to know? He asks, his voice barely above a whisper. The girl who only speaks English or the one who just listened to everything I said? Ember looks at him, stripping away every wall she has left. Both. He doesn't reply. He doesn't argue. He just turns away, walking down the short hallway to his bedroom. The door clicks softly shut behind him. For the next 4 days, they exist like ghosts haunting the same house. The comfortable routine is entirely broken. There is no coffee left out on the counter. There are no lingering moments in the kitchen. Every time they cross paths in the narrow hallway, T Min politely bows, his eyes firmly averted, retreating back into the stiff, distant stranger she met on the very first day. It breaks her heart completely, because she knows she is the one who built the wall back up. On the 5th day, the sky opens up again. It isn't a gentle drizzle. It is a torrential, soul-soaking downpour that threatens to flood the street-level entrances. Mrs. Han, the landlady, is caught outside the building's main office, struggling to keep her umbrella open while frantically jiggling a key that refuses to turn in the lock. Ember hears the commotion from the living room, the shrill, frustrated cry of the elderly woman, and she doesn't hesitate. She grabs her coat and bolts for the door. As she reaches the hallway, she finds T-Min already there. He is soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, having just returned from work. They lock eyes for a fleeting second. His expression is guarded, pained, before they both turn their focus to the emergency at hand. They don't speak. They don't have to. They rush out into the rain. While T-Min tries to shield Mrs. Han with his coat, blocking the worst of the wind, Ember kneels on the wet concrete. She pulls a stiff piece of plastic from her pocket and a bobby pin from her hair, a trick she saw in an old detective documentary. Her hands are shaking, not from the cold, but from the proximity to him. He is right there, his shoulder brushing against her arm as he leans in to hold the flashlight steady. "A little to the left," she says, her voice steady despite the adrenaline. T-Min adjusts the beam. He doesn't pull away. He watches her work, his gaze flickering from the lock to her focused, determined profile. For a moment, the world narrows down to just this: the sound of the rain, the click of metal against metal, and the scent of rain and soap radiating off him. The door finally clicks open. Mrs. Han lets out a jubilant shout, patting them both on the shoulder before bustling inside. Ember and T-Min are left standing in the damp, quiet stairwell, the heavy sound of the storm muffling the rest of the city. They are both dripping wet. T-Min looks down at his hands, then up at her. The silence isn't the cold, suffocating wall of the last 4 days. It is heavy, yes, but it is charged with something else. It is the silence of two people who have finally run out of reasons to be angry. He realizes in that quiet, dripping moment that the girl standing in front of him is the exact same person who made him spicy food when he was exhausted. She is the same person who stayed up late to fix his presentations. She is the same person who stood in the dark with him, listening to him talk about a mother he missed. She never changed. Only his assumptions did. T-Min lets out a long, slow breath, his shoulders finally dropping. The rigid posture he's held for days dissolves. He rubs the back of his neck, looking at the floor before meeting her eyes again. "So," he says softly, his voice rough but devoid of the sharp edge of betrayal. The singing in the shower. Ember feels a sudden, overwhelming rush of relief. It hits her so hard she almost sways. She laughs, a genuine startled sound that echoes in the small stairwell. She answers him in Korean, her voice smooth, effortless, and warm. Every single missed note. "You're truly, profoundly terrible." T-Min shakes his head, a reluctant, crooked smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. He steps closer, closing the final 2 feet between them. The air in the stairwell feels thick with everything they haven't said. "You're a terrible roommate," he whispers, though his eyes are soft. "You lied to me for 3 months. I was protecting myself," she counters, stepping into his space. She isn't afraid anymore. "And you were making excuses not to talk to me because you were scared." He doesn't deny it. He just watches her, his gaze dropping to her lips before flicking back up to her eyes. The tension that had been a barrier is now a bridge. "I wasn't scared of you," he murmurs. "I was scared of how much I already liked you before I even knew your name." By the time the cherry blossoms bloom in the city weeks later, the apartment feels completely different. The cool, quiet distance of winter is gone, replaced by the loud, chaotic, and beautiful warmth of two people who have nothing left to hide. The living room is a mess of books and laptop chargers. They sit on the floor, sharing a takeout box of bibimbap. "Pass the water," T-Min says casually in Korean, his hand resting near hers. Ember hands it to him without looking up from her phone. "You need to buy more rice tomorrow, you know. You eat like a growing teenager," she replies in fluent, teasing Korean. There is no pretending. There is no holding back. There is no fear of being the foreigner or the roommate. Ember leans back against the sofa, watching him eat. She thinks about that rainy Tuesday 3 months ago and the silent, terrified man who bowed to her in the hallway. She thinks about the candle, the burning toast, and the umbrella he left by the door. She realizes that he had been loving her in his own quiet, clumsy, and wonderful way long before he ever found the words to say it. T-Min looks up, catches her staring, and pauses. He doesn't look away. He just reaches out, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. His touch is light, reverent, and completely honest. He asks, his voice barely a whisper. "Nothing," she smiles, leaning into his palm. Just listening, he laughs, a deep, comfortable sound that vibrates through the floorboards. He knows she understands. He knows she hears everything. And for the first time in his life, that is exactly what he wants. They are no longer two solitary people existing in a shared space. They are home. In the apartment on the corner, the lights stay on late into the night, the sound of their shared laughter drifting out through the open window and into the cool, floral-scented air of a Seoul spring. They have finally stopped observing each other and started truly seeing. And they know, with a quiet, unshakable certainty, that they are exactly where they are supposed to be. We've come to the end of this story. It was a short and beautiful one. If you loved it, please like and subscribe to support this channel. Also comment if you think what Ember did made any sense. See you on the next video.